Thanks, Sugar. Morning, Paul. I know you mentioned the sometimes a change is as good as a rest, but was the matchup with the Leafs also a factor in moving Dubois with Wheeler, and maybe something you might look to in terms of the matchup with Austin Matthews or Tavares this series?
It was part of it. I mean, the idea that you don't want to make a change for one game unless it's, to keep your team interested or to spark something. There were kind of 3 or 4 pieces to this. The first was, as I said, like going back to when we first acquired Pierre-Luc, that was one of the combinations that you have that you'd like to see. Then there was the end of a road trip, a little bit of a change to see if you could spark something. And I had been, I don't know if reticent is the right word, but I wanted to be careful about changing Pierre-Luc's line because going after game 1 of the Vancouver set, I really liked where they were at. The 2 Edmonton games, I liked what they were doing, thought it was growing, and then it kind of leveled off. And I thought for a while there that Scheif's line was grinding and playing hard, but there wasn't a whole lot going on. So that was kind of the other part. But then you got to give your team the best chance to win every night, but you also have to understand your team by the time the regular season's over. Like we see such different styles of hockey in this division. Vancouver-Calgary set had been, straight line, almost every puck dumped, really physical battles at both ends. And then the Toronto and Edmonton series are so much danger off the rush. So you need to kind of get through these games with an idea of what changes could you make to your lines when you play different teams, when you get into a series and something's not working. So we have to learn more about this team. And with Pierre-Luc here moving with, I'd like to leave it for a while and just see where it goes.
We'll go next to Sarah Lesky from TSN. Go ahead, Sarah.
Morning, Paul. When you said that you had wanted to see Wheeler and Dubois together, is that because of the style of game that they play, or what Blake, as a veteran and just his leadership style with younger players, what he could bring?
Both. The idea is that, like, I think the most important thing between a player and a coach is they kind of have to agree on what the player's good at. And so that would be the bulk of the conversations we've had with Pierre-Luc is, with a style of game we think he can excel at, the player he wants to be, and, tonight, but 5 years from now, what direction are we going? And he's a hybrid, right? He's got some hands, he can make plays, he's a skilled guy. At the same time, he's a big, powerful man. And so Blake would be prototypical in that. That would be the style of game in that area of Pierre-Luc's game that we see, that we think there's going to be a lot of growth. And it's simple, right? Pierre-Luc didn't slow his game down to keep Blake happy in the game, because that's not what Blake wants. And he's vocal about that. Don't try to give me the puck to keep me happy. Put it in front, put it in the hole, put it in the corner, I'll go get it. So it takes some pressure off a guy, and then I think we saw a slightly different style of game that Pierre-Luc can play. So that's what the hope is, that we can develop all parts of his game, and a big part of that is who you play with. Who you play with affects the way the game is played, and it brings out, different nuances in each player's game.
We'll go next to Paul Stravevsky from NHL.com. Go ahead, Paul.
Good morning, Paul. I was wondering, for you as just an observer of the NHL, does this upcoming trade deadline feel any different from a normal one? With COVID, with the way divisions are, with the 56-game schedule, with how fast things change. What are the differences you're seeing?
Yeah, it feels different, and I can only kind of talk about what's going on in Winnipeg. There's been a great opportunity here for the team to spend time together. Now, we just spent 12 games on the road, 2 at home. So we've been together every day, all the time. So there's feels like a real closeness in our group, right? So that takes on a different idea. The whole quarantine, we went through it with Pierre-Luc. So there's that short schedule. You usually get a trade kind of, maybe it feels like there hasn't been as much talk about it. That's what it feels like here, right? Like, the normal trade deadline feels like there's a long ramp up to it, and there's more time for speculation. Maybe we've just been on the road and haven't been reading anything, but it doesn't feel the same. None of this feels the same. And I think probably all of these teams that are pretty happy with where their game's at are probably, there's a chance they're closer together now than at any other time. We only see each other. So it's a pretty tight knit group. So it would be more almost maybe, I don't know. There doesn't seem to be as many guys asking, hey, what are you hearing out there? What's going on? They're pretty happy with the group that we have.
We'll go next to Paul Friesen from the Winnipeg Sun. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Gregor. Hey, Paul, given home ice advantage maybe is a bit debatable how much there is without fans, how much of a carrot for this team is top spot?
Yeah, I don't think that anybody feels it's necessary. And there's a chance it may not even be advantageous. Maybe you be careful about the team you think you want to play, right, in the first round. There's lots of teams that start on the road that almost feel they have an advantage, right? They can play the simpler playoff game that makes them, when there's more pressure that shifts on the home team. You know what, Paul, it's almost like the last question. There's a whole lot of stuff I don't know anymore, right? Because I have no experience with it. Like the road isn't the same at all. Like we just did 12 days on the road, and I mean, that would have been such a grinder in our normal schedule. You get off the plane at 2 a.m. all the time, and it just didn't feel like that. We were pretty strong in the last game of each set. So we don't talk about the standings. We talk about our game, right? Everybody's aware of how this fits, and there's still 20 games left, and you got 3 teams, 2 points. This thing's going to jockey and move all the way through.
We'll go next to Jason Bell from the Winnipeg Free Press. Go ahead, Jason.
Hey, Paul, I don't want to belabor the point about Pierre-Luc playing with Blake Wheeler and Paul Stastny, but just in my mind, it's got to be a little overwhelming when you step on the ice with the other 2 guys that have so much speed in Kyle Connor and Nikolai Ehlers. Is there a sense that with 25 and 26, there's an opportunity that things slow down a little bit more, and there's time to process? I mean, is that kind of what you were getting at?
No, I think it's almost more style of game. So, I mean, just look at the Calgary, the Scheifele line. So Mark's unusual. I'm beating this to death. Mark's unusual. He's one of the rare players that controls the puck as much as most players in the offensive zone, but he doesn't generate an awful lot of shots, right? He's got an incredibly high shooting percentage. He only picks his shots. But in that Calgary, you said that became a really strong rush line, right? So Pierre-Luc has this other part to his game, which is big, strong, and hang on the puck, kind of like Mark, but it's a different rush game. So when Pierre-Luc goes with Blake, it's more, and Stas, it's those guys just make the right play. If that means you got to put the puck in deep, Stas is so good at reading forechecks, and Blake is so fast and physical, and now Pierre-Luc can kind of play that game, that I think that Pierre-Luc almost sped his game up, because I found him slightly slowing his game down to look for the next play with those 2 guys, right? Because they are so dynamic off the rush. They were trying to create some things off the rush, and they were really close to getting it. You're thinking it's right there. And if we had a whole bunch of practice time, they might be able to develop that. It is a simpler game with Wheeler and Stas for Pierre-Luc to play. And then I actually found him moving quicker.
We'll go next to Kelly Moore from CJOB. Go ahead, Kelly.
Hey, good morning, Paul.
Morning.
Understanding that the lines have been swapped up a little bit on both sides, but and kind of off of Paul Friesen's question, how much different will this series look because you have the last say on the matchups, or do you think there's going to be much significance in how you try to work your lines and your D pairs against Toronto?
There may be a little bit. I didn't feel in the Toronto set that we played on the road that there were a bunch of times on the bench where I felt like I jammed into something I didn't want, right? Because the teams are fairly structured, so they're more than comfortable having their so-called third line, and then if you've got, the veterans they put on their fourth line, they'll play those lines against your best D-zone faceoffs. They're not worried about, and that would be true of us as well, right? So there's not the impetus for either coach to say I can't win this game, or the other way, I got a way better chance of winning this game if I get this hard match, right? Because if you go after and you put your number one set of D on Dubois, then you've got Scheif to contain. It's the same with Matthews, and they've got Tavares, and then they still got guys that can score. You know, Andrew Copp's got a bunch of points in the 3-hole. So I didn't feel that. We're still learning about our group with Pierre-Luc, and you know, we scored a bunch of goals with the Scheifele line. There might be a threshold of skill that you may have too much on one line, right? Too much of one style of player, and one of those wings may have to flip at some point in time. But we'll run it here, and that's really what the regular season is all about, right? Getting to figure out how you need to make adjustments with your team to deal with, as it stands today, either Toronto, Edmonton, or Montreal. So that's the learning process that we're trying to go through right now.
And final question to Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet. Go ahead, Sean.
Thanks, Gregor. Hey, Paul. More along the lines of the matchup side of things. You said the other day that you've never really coached a lineup like this in your career that has this level of depth. But when it comes to the last change and, you know, trying to end up finishing first and have that for the playoffs, is the depth that you have now the great eraser when it comes to the last change, or does it make that last change that much more important given the tools you have to direct in the matchup?
So I would have thought that the last change was far more important in years prior when we didn't have the same depth, because I mean, I'll use Thompson and in the D zone against the other team's best because they're good at it, right? He's a great face-off man. Lewis and Pearl will battle pucks out. I may not run that match all night, but you've got Lowry and you've got Thompson. Right now, Mark's been really, his numbers are starting to get good on his face-off, so he's taking a lot of right side draws. You may see Scheif come back out with Wheeler and Stastny on right side D zone face-off draws. So I'm not as married to the matchup right now, and a lot of that has to just to do with our schedule. 17 games, and we got 3 more weeks of this. It's more important that I get everybody evened out than it is that you get a specific match on any night. And then you got to try to react to it, because one night that's not going to be true, right? And we weren't able to do it on the road in Edmonton when the two big dogs got together and won the games for them. So there's certainly something to the match, but I haven't matched nearly as hard over this month being on the road as maybe in times past.